I never thought I'd be the guy standing in a hospital room at 3 a.m., staring at the woman I'd loved for 15 years, while a circle of her own family screamed that I was murdering her. But there I was, heart slamming against my ribs like it wanted out, their voices bouncing off the sterile white walls as they yelled, eyes burning into me like I was the devil himself. How did it all go so wrong so fast? One minute I was holding her hand, begging her to stay, and the next I was the villain in my own house, the one my kids were hearing called evil behind closed doors. And now I've got 3 months to watch her parents and brothers pack up everything they own and leave the only home my children have ever known. Or lose what little sanity I have left. Let me take you back, because none of this started in that hospital. It started the way every good love story does. Messy, real, and full of promise. I was 22, fresh out of community college, with a beat-up truck and a construction job that left me smelling like sawdust and regret every night. She was 25, this fiery, organized whirlwind named Emily, who worked at a respite care center for adults with disabilities. God, she was beautiful. Dark hair, always pulled back in this neat ponytail, eyes that could go from warm chocolate to steel in a heartbeat. We met at a friend's backyard barbecue. I spilled beer on her shoes trying to impress her with some dumb joke about power tools, and instead of getting mad, she laughed, wiped it off, and told me I owed her a dance. That was it. From that night on, I was hooked. We got married 2 years later in a tiny church packed with her huge extended family. Her mom hugged me so tight, I thought my ribs would crack, whispering how happy she was that her daughter had found a good man. Her dad clapped me on the back and called me son for the first time. Her 3 brothers, big, loud guys who worked construction like me, took me under their wing, teaching me a few choice swear words and how to grill steaks the right way. I thought I'd hit the jackpot. We bought our first house together, a modest 3-bedroom in the suburbs, with a backyard big enough for the kids we dreamed about. Life felt solid, safe. Then the kids came, 3 of them in 4 years. First, our daughter Sophie, then the twins, Matthew and Isabella. Emily ran our home like a well-oiled machine. She was a neat freak, the kind who color-coded the pantry and folded towels with military precision. But it wasn't just about clean counters. She'd seen too much in her job. People trapped in bodies that wouldn't let them go, hooked up to machines, staring at ceilings for years while their families fell apart around them. Late at night, after the kids were asleep, she'd curl into my chest and make me promise, "If it ever happens to me, baby, don't let them keep me like that. I'd rather go than be a burden. Swear it." I'd kiss her forehead and swear every single time, never thinking I'd actually have to keep that promise. 5 years ago, everything shifted. Emily's parents, Grandma Rose and Grandpa Charles, hit a rough patch. Her dad's construction company went under, and suddenly they were staring at foreclosure. Her brothers Luke and Danny were in between jobs too. Emily didn't even hesitate. "They're family," she said, squeezing my hand across the kitchen table one night while the kids played in the living room. "We have the space. They can help with the kids, pitch in on bills. It'll be temporary." I loved her so much, I agreed without a second thought. We turned the basement into a little apartment for her parents, and the boys took the spare bedroom upstairs. It felt right at first. Rose cooked those incredible meals that filled the house with the smell of spices and fresh bread. Charles fixed the leaky faucet I'd been ignoring for months. The brothers played soccer in the backyard with the kids and taught them how to ride bikes without training wheels. Our home got louder, fuller, warmer, but over time, the temporary stretched into forever. The arguments started small. Rose would rearrange my tools in the garage the right way, and I'd bite my tongue. Danny would blast country music at midnight after a few beers, waking the twins. I'd pull Emily aside and whisper, "Babe, we need boundaries." She'd sigh and say, "They're helping us so much, just a little longer." I loved her, so I swallowed it. We built a life around all of us. Family dinners every Sunday, Holidays that turned the house into a chaotic, beautiful mess of laughter and kids running everywhere. I told myself it was worth it. Then came that night. It was a Tuesday, nothing special. Emily had worked a double at the center, came home exhausted but smiling, kissed each kid on the forehead, and crawled into bed beside me around 11. I remember the way she smelled, like vanilla lotion and the faint antiseptic from work. She snuggled against me, her hand on my chest, and whispered, "Love you more than yesterday." I kissed her hair and fell asleep to the sound of her breathing. I woke up to her gasping. It was like the world slowed down. 1 second she was fine, the next she was clutching her head, eyes wide with panic. "Something's wrong," she managed, voice slurred. I fumbled for the light, heart already racing, and saw her face, half of it drooping, like someone had pulled a string on one side. Stroke. I knew it instantly from those horrible PSAs. I screamed for help, but the house was asleep. I scooped her up, God, she felt so light in my arms, and ran downstairs yelling for Rose and Charles. They burst out of the basement in their pajamas, eyes wide. Luke and Danny came thundering down right behind them. We got her in the car, me driving like a madman, Rose in the back holding Emily's head in her lap, praying so fast it sounded like one long word. The hospital was a blur of fluorescent lights and beeping machines. They rushed her back, and I paced the waiting room like a caged animal, the whole family huddled around me. Hours passed. Doctors came out with grave faces. Massive hemorrhagic stroke. Brain swelling they couldn't control. She was on life support, but the scans, they were bad. Really bad. They sat me down in this cold little room and explained the options. Keep her hooked up indefinitely, or let her go. Emily's wishes echoed in my head like a drumbeat. I could hear her voice from all those late-night talks. I didn't even have to think about it. I signed the papers. That's when the ambush happened. I walked back into her room, legs like lead, just wanting one last moment alone with her before. But they were all there. Rose, Charles, Luke, Danny, 2 aunts, and uncle, 6 or 7 of them crammed around her bed like they'd been waiting. The doctor was there too, adjusting something on the monitor, but he stepped back when he saw the tension crackle in the air. Rose's eyes were red and wild. She pointed a finger at me and started yelling, voice shaking. "How could you? She's your wife! You're killing her!" The others jumped in, one after another, their words tumbling out so fast I could barely keep up. "Selfish! Cruel! God will judge you! She deserves a chance!" Luke got right in my face, chest puffed out. "You think you know what she wants? You're not even blood." My stomach twisted into a knot so tight I thought I'd vomit. The room smelled like antiseptic and fear, the machines beeping steadily like a countdown. I could feel my pulse in my ears. I wanted to scream, to tell them about every promise she'd made me keep, about the neat freak woman who planned her own funeral down to the playlist because she hated loose ends. But all that came out was a choked, "This is what she wanted," she told me. She worked with people like this every day, she knew. They didn't hear me. Rose started sobbing, dramatic and loud, the kind that makes nurses poke their heads in. Charles muttered something about lawyers. The aunts crossed themselves and glared like I was Satan incarnate. I stood my ground, but inside I was shattering. My wife was lying there, still warm but already gone, and the people who were supposed to be my family were tearing me apart over her body. I felt the bile rise in my throat, the weight of every year we'd shared pressing down until I could barely breathe. The doctor finally stepped in, quietly confirming that the decision was mine as next of kin, and that Emily's charts showed no advance directive overriding it. But the damage was done. They left the room in a storm of whispers, shooting me looks that could cut glass. The next few days were hell. The funeral was a sea of black dresses and accusing eyes. I held my kids close, Sophie clutching my leg, the twins too young to fully get it, but sensing the storm. Back at the house, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Rose stopped cooking. The brothers stopped playing with the kids. Every conversation turned into a minefield. And then I started hearing it from my own daughter. "Daddy, why is Grandma saying you're evil?" My blood ran cold. Matthew repeated it later, innocent and confused. "Your dad is evil." The words landed like punches to the gut. I lost my wife, and now I was losing my kids' trust in my own home. That's when I knew I couldn't do this anymore. The memories were everywhere. The spot on the couch where Emily and I would collapse after putting the kids to bed. The kitchen where she'd dance while chopping onions. The basement stairs where her parents had lived for half a decade. Every argument we'd ever had about boundaries replayed in my head on loop. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I was drowning in grief and rage and guilt all at once. So one night, after the kids were in bed, I called the whole family into the living room. My voice shook, but I forced it out. "I love you all, but what happened in that hospital, the way you disrespected Emily's wishes, the way you're talking about me in front of my kids, I can't live like this. I need you to move out. 3 months. Get your affairs in order, take your furniture, all of it. I'm sorry, but this house can't hold us anymore." The explosion was immediate. Rose wailed like I'd stabbed her. Charles stood up, face red, saying I was ungrateful after everything they'd done. The money they'd sunk into the house, the furniture they'd bought, the childcare they'd provided for free. Danny called me a heartless bastard. They reminded me how they'd helped when the twins were colicky, how Rose had rocked them for hours so Emily and I could have date nights. And they hit me where it hurt most. "You're putting undue strain on the kids. They need their grandparents. You're the one tearing this family apart." I felt every word like a knife. Part of me wondered if they were right. Was I the monster here? Had grief made me cruel? But then I'd remember Emily's voice, that quiet promise in the dark, and my spine would straighten. I was doing this for her, for us, for the kids who deserved a home that didn't feel like a battlefield. The silence that followed my words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Rose's face crumpled first. Her mouth opened in this raw, wounded sound that wasn't quite a sob and wasn't quite a scream. She sank onto the couch, the same couch where Emily used to curl up with a blanket and the kids piled on top of her like puppies. Charles stood behind her, hands on her shoulders, but his knuckles were white, and he wouldn't look at me. Luke and Danny exchanged a glance, the kind brothers do when they're about to lose it, and then Luke stepped forward, voice low and dangerous. "You're really doing this? After everything? We buried your wife 3 weeks ago, and now you're kicking us out like we're strangers?" My chest tightened so hard I could feel my ribs creak. I wanted to yell back that they weren't strangers. They were the family I'd chosen when I married Emily, but the words stuck in my throat, because deep down, I knew part of me was terrified I was making the biggest mistake of my life. The living room smelled like the faint leftover scent of Rose's chili from the night before, the one she used to make every Sunday because it was Emily's favorite. Now, it just made my stomach twist. I could hear the kids upstairs, their little voices muffled through the floorboards. Sophie reading a bedtime story to the twins in that serious big sister tone she'd picked up since the funeral. They didn't know yet what I'd just done. How was I supposed to explain to a 6-year-old and 2 4-year-olds that Grandma and Grandpa were leaving because Daddy couldn't breathe in this house anymore? The days after that announcement blurred into this heavy, suffocating fog. 3 months. I gave them 3 months, and every single one of those days felt like walking through quicksand. Mornings were the worst. I'd wake up reaching for Emily out of habit, my hand hitting cold sheets, and then the reality would crash down again. Downstairs, the kitchen would be dead quiet. No radio playing country music, no clatter of pots as Rose whipped up breakfast. She'd stopped cooking entirely after the hospital. Instead, She'd sit at the table with her coffee gone cold, staring at the wall where Emily's neat little calendar still hung, the dates circled in her perfect handwriting for soccer practice and dentist appointments. I'd try to make small talk, ask how their apartment hunt was going, and she'd just give me this hollow look that said everything. "You're tearing the family apart," she'd whisper in that thick accent, the same one that used to make me laugh when she mangled a few phrases. Now it just made my heart ache. Inside, I was a wreck. At night, I'd lie awake replaying that hospital room on loop. The way the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry bees. The smell of hand sanitizer and fresh linen mixed with the faint metallic tang of fear sweat. Rose's finger jabbing at me, her voice cracking as she switched between yelling and pleading. "You think you are God? You decide when my daughter dies?" The brothers backing her up, their faces twisted in grief and fury, calling me selfish, heartless, evil. I'd stood there like a statue, jaw locked, repeating the same thing over and over. She told me. She made me promise. She saw what that life did to people every single day at work. But in the quiet of my bedroom, doubt crept in like shadows. What if I was wrong? What if Emily would have fought? What if keeping her on those machines for a little longer would have given us one more miracle? My hands would shake under the covers, and I'd press my face into her pillow just to catch the last trace of her vanilla scent before it faded completely. The kids picked up on it fast. Sophie started having nightmares, waking up screaming that Grandma was mad at Daddy. I'd rock her back to sleep, whispering lies about how everything was going to be okay, while my own chest felt like it was caving in. The twins would ask why Grandpa wasn't fixing the swing set anymore, why Danny didn't play monster tag in the backyard. I tried to shield them, but you can't hide tension that thick. One afternoon I walked into the living room and caught Rose on the phone with one of the aunts, voice low and venomous. "Yeah, the dad is bad. Evil, like I said." Matthew was sitting right there on the rug, playing with his trucks, and he looked up at me with those big brown eyes, Emily's eyes, and said, "Daddy, are you evil?" I dropped to my knees right there on the carpet, pulled him into my arms so tight I was probably crushing him, and fought back the tears burning behind my eyes. "No, buddy. Daddy's just really sad. Like you. But we're gonna be okay." I didn't believe it myself, but I said it like a prayer. Weeks dragged on. The brothers started packing in the evenings, boxes stacking up in the hallway like tombstones. They took the big leather sectional they'd bought when the twins were born, the one we'd all crammed onto for movie nights. Rose carefully wrapped her ceramic rooster collection, the bright red ones that used to line the kitchen windowsill and make Emily smile every morning. Every time I passed those boxes, guilt clawed at me. They had poured so much into this house. The new roof after the hailstorm, the playset out back, the endless hours of free babysitting so Emily and I could steal date nights at that little diner downtown. Charles had taught me how to change the oil in my truck without getting ripped off. Danny had carried Sophie on his shoulders at her first parade. They weren't bad people. They were grieving too, just like me. But every shared memory now felt poisoned by the way they'd looked at me in that hospital room. Like I was the one who'd killed her instead of the stroke. I started questioning everything. Was I really doing this for the kids? Or was I just too broken to share space with the people who reminded me of her every second? The arguments we'd had over the years replayed in my head. The ones where Emily would defend them, her hand on my arm, saying, "They're family, baby. Blood is thicker." I'd always given in because I loved her more than I hated the chaos. Now she was gone, and the chaos had turned into something sharper, something that cut my kids when they weren't looking. One night, I found Sophie crying in the basement apartment, curled up on Rose's bed while her grandma stroked her hair. "Grandma says you don't want us anymore," Sophie whispered when I picked her up. My heart split right down the middle. I carried her upstairs, sat on the edge of her bed, and tried to explain in words a little girl could understand that sometimes grown-ups need space to heal, that mommy would want us to be happy even if it hurt for a while. But the words tasted like ash. As the deadline crept closer, 2 months, then 6 weeks, the house felt smaller, the air thicker. I'd catch Charles staring out the back window at the garden he'd planted with Emily, tomatoes and peppers that were just starting to ripen. He didn't say much anymore, just nodded when I asked about moving logistics. Rose's eyes followed me everywhere, heavy with accusation. The brothers stopped speaking to me directly. They'd go through the kids like messengers. "Tell your dad the fridge is broken again." I fixed it anyway, because what else could I do? I was the bad guy in their story, but in mine, I was just a man trying not to drown. Grief hit me in waves at the strangest times. I'd be loading the dishwasher and remember Emily laughing and how I always put the forks in wrong. Or I'd hear a car door slam outside and think for a split second it was her coming home from work. The emptiness was a living thing, gnawing at my insides until I'd have to step outside some nights, stand in the driveway under the streetlight, and just breathe until the panic eased. I started seeing a counselor, some quiet guy with a box of tissues on the table, who told me it was normal to feel torn between loyalty and survival. But knowing it was normal didn't make the knot in my stomach loosen. The counselor's words echoed in my head for days after that session, but life didn't slow down to let me process them. The calendar on the fridge, still in Emily's handwriting, kept ticking closer to the 3-month mark like a bomb with a visible fuse. I'd catch myself staring at it while making the kids' lunches, the pen marks blurring through the tears I refused to let fall in front of them. Sophie was the one who noticed first. She'd climb into my lap after school, her small hands framing my face, and ask in that wise beyond her years voice, "Daddy, why does Grandma look at you like she's mad all the time? Did you do something bad to Mommy?" My throat closed up every single time. I'd pull her close, breathing in the strawberry shampoo Emily used to buy in bulk, and whisper that sometimes grown-ups fight when they're sad, but it doesn't mean they don't love each other. Inside, though, I was screaming. How do you explain to a child that grief had turned her grandparents into strangers who saw me as the enemy? The packing turned the house into a war zone of cardboard and tape. Cardboard boxes lined the hallways like barricades, labeled in Rose's careful script: kitchen, kids' clothes, Emily's keepsakes. Every morning I'd step over them on my way to work, the sharp scent of fresh cardboard mixing with the dust from the basement where Charles was dismantling the makeshift apartment they'd called home for half a decade. He didn't speak to me anymore, just gave these short nods when our paths crossed. His shoulders slumped like the weight of losing his daughter had finally crushed him. One evening, I found him in the garage, sitting on an overturned bucket, staring at the tool chest he'd helped me organize years ago. "You remember when we fixed the transmission together?" he asked, voice rough from disuse. I nodded, chest tight, because I remembered. The grease on our hands, Emily bringing us cold beers, the 3 of us laughing until the kids begged for rides in the truck bed. "She was proud of you that day," he said quietly. Then he stood up, wiped his eyes, and walked away without another word. I stood there alone under the flickering fluorescent light, fists clenched, wondering if I was erasing every good memory we'd ever built, just to save myself. The brothers were louder about it. Luke cornered me in the driveway one Saturday while I was washing the car, the same car I'd driven Emily to the hospital in that night. "You know the kids are going to remember this, right?" he said, arms crossed, tattoos flexing on his forearms. "They're going to grow up thinking their dad chose himself over family. That's what you're teaching them." Danny stood behind him, nodding, eyes hard. I felt the anger flare hot in my veins, but underneath it was this bone-deep exhaustion that made my knees weak. "I'm teaching them to honor what their mom wanted," I shot back, voice cracking. "She didn't want to be kept alive like some machine. She told me that 100 times. And she wouldn't want our house turning into a place where her own kids hear their dad called evil." The words hung there between us, heavy as the summer humidity pressing down on my skin. Luke's jaw worked like he was chewing on something bitter, but he didn't have a comeback. He just turned and slammed the screen door so hard the glass rattled. Nights were when the real torture hit. After the kids were asleep, I'd sit on the back porch with a beer I barely touched, staring at the swing set Charles had built with his own hands. The cicadas would scream in the trees, and I'd replay every argument Emily and I ever had about her family living here. "They're blood, baby," she'd say, her head on my shoulder, fingers tracing lazy circles on my chest. "Blood stays." I'd argued back then, pointing out how the house felt smaller every year, how the brothers' late-night parties were waking the twins, how Rose's passive-aggressive comments about my way of doing things chipped away at me. But I always caved because her smile could light up the darkest room. Now that smile was gone, and I was left holding the pieces, trying to decide if I was selfish for finally drawing the line, or if I was just surviving. The kids started acting out more as the deadline loomed. Isabella threw a tantrum in the grocery store because she wanted the cereal Rose always bought, the one with the bright pink box that Emily used to sneak into the cart as a treat. Matthew refused to eat dinner one night, pushing his plate away and crying, "I want Grandma's fried chicken!" I sat there at the table, fork hovering, feeling like the worst father alive. Sophie was quieter, but her eyes followed me like she was waiting for me to break. One night she crawled into bed with me, clutching the stuffed bear Emily had given her on her 5th birthday. "Daddy," she whispered into the dark, "if Grandma and Grandpa leave, will you still love me?" The question shattered what was left of my heart. I held her until she fell asleep, tears soaking into her hair, and promised her over and over that nothing would ever change that. But inside I wondered if I was breaking them more than I was protecting them. With 1 month left, the house started to echo. Furniture disappeared piece by piece. The dining table they'd bought for our first big family Thanksgiving, the coffee table scarred from years of kids' toy cars and spilled juice. Rose began cooking again, but only for the kids, leaving my plate empty like I didn't exist. The smell of fresh apple pie would waft upstairs, and I'd stand in the kitchen doorway, invisible, watching her teach Sophie how to fold the crust the way Emily used to. It was beautiful and brutal all at once. I wanted to thank her, to hug her, to tell her I was sorry for the pain we were all swimming in. Instead, I just turned away, the lump in my throat too big to speak around. I started having dreams about Emily, vivid ones where she was standing in the hospital room, healthy and whole, smiling at me with that neat freak ponytail and saying, "You did good, baby. Now let them go." I'd wake up gasping, reaching for her side of the bed, only to remember all over again. The grief counselor said it was my subconscious giving me permission, but it felt more like torture. Because what if the dreams were wrong? What if I was the one destroying the family she'd fought so hard to keep together? The final 2 weeks were a blur of real estate listings and tense phone calls. Rose and Charles found a small apartment across town. Nothing fancy, but close enough for the kids to visit on weekends. The brothers were moving in with an uncle for now. I helped load the last of the heavy boxes into the truck on moving day, muscles burning, sweat stinging my eyes. Rose didn't look at me when she climbed into the passenger seat. Charles shook my hand once, quick and formal, like strangers. Luke and Danny just nodded from the curb. The kids stood on the porch waving, Sophie's lip trembling, the twins confused and excited about the new adventure I'd tried to sell them. As the taillights disappeared down the street, the house fell silent for the first time in 5 years. I sank onto the front steps, head in my hands, the empty swing set creaking in the breeze like a ghost. The weight that lifted off my chest was real, but so was the hole it left behind. I thought about Emily's promise, about the neat freak woman who hated loose ends, and I whispered to the empty air, "I kept my word, babe. I hope you're proud." The weight that lifted off my chest was real, but so was the hole it left behind. I thought about Emily's promise, about the neat freak woman who hated loose ends, and I whispered to the empty air, "I kept my word, babe. I hope you're proud." The words barely made it past the lump in my throat before the tears came hot and fast, soaking my shirt as I sat there on those concrete steps until the streetlights flickered on and the neighborhood dogs started barking at nothing. For the first time in years, the house was quiet. No country radio drifting up from the basement, no clatter of Rose's pans, no brothers yelling at a game on TV. Just me and the echo of my own breathing. And it felt both like freedom and like the loneliest place on earth. The first week after they left was the hardest. I'd wake up to the sound of my own footsteps creaking on the floorboards and jump, half expecting to hear Rose calling the kids down for breakfast in that sing-song voice of hers. Instead, there was nothing but the hum of the fridge and the soft rustle of the twins stirring in their room. I made pancakes, burnt on the edges because I was still half distracted by memories, and the kids ate them in silence at first, Sophie pushing her syrup around with her fork like she was drawing something sad on the plate. "Daddy," she finally said, voice small, "the house feels too big now." My heart clenched so tight I had to set the spatula down. I knelt beside her chair, wiped a smear of syrup from her cheek, and told her the truth I was still figuring out myself. "Yeah, baby, it does. But we're gonna fill it up with new memories. Just you, me, and the twins. Mommy would want that." Isabella piped up then, eyes wide and trusting. "Will Grandma still come for my birthday?" I swallowed hard and nodded, promising visits on weekends, video calls, anything to keep the bridge from burning completely. Inside, I wondered if Rose would even answer my texts after the way we'd left things. Grief didn't pack up and leave with the moving truck. It stayed, but it changed shape. Some nights I'd sit on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty side where Emily used to sleep, and the guilt would hit like a freight train. I'd replay every accusation they'd hurled in that hospital room. The evil, the cruel, the words that still stung. My hands would shake as I clutched her pillow, breathing in the last fading trace of her vanilla lotion. And I'd whisper apologies into the dark for every argument we'd ever had about boundaries, for every time I'd wished they'd just give us space. But then I'd remember her face on those quiet nights, the way her eyes would go serious when she talked about the patients she cared for. The ones who lingered too long in bodies that had already left. "Don't let that be me," she'd begged, and I'd promised. Standing my ground in that room hadn't been murder. It had been love, the hardest, most brutal kind. The kids started healing faster than I did. Sophie organized her closet one Saturday morning, folding shirts with the same precise corners Emily used to use, and I caught her smiling at her reflection like she was channeling her mom. The twins turned the basement into their new playroom, running around the empty space like it was a kingdom they'd just discovered. Laughter started filling the corners again. Real laughter, not the forced kind we'd been faking for months. One evening, Matthew climbed into my lap while I was scrolling through old photos on my phone and pointed at a picture of all of us at the park, Grandma holding his hand. "I miss them," he said simply, "but I like it when it's just us sometimes." Those words cracked something open in me. I hugged him tight, feeling the warmth of his little body, and realized I wasn't the only one who'd been suffocating under all that tension. The house wasn't a battlefield anymore. It was becoming ours again. Months passed in that strange, slow dance of grief and rebuilding. I kept my promise to the kids. Rose and Charles came over every other weekend, awkward at first, eyes still carrying shadows of hurt when they looked at me. But the kids' squeals of joy when the car pulled up started melting the ice. We sat on the back porch drinking iced tea, talking about Emily in careful, gentle sentences. And one afternoon, Rose reached over and squeezed my hand for the first time since the hospital. "She would have been proud of you," she whispered, voice thick. "For the kids. For everything." The words landed soft, like a bandage on a wound I didn't know was still bleeding. I didn't cry in front of her, but later that night, alone in the shower, the water mixed with tears until I couldn't tell the difference. I started dating again eventually. Not seriously, just coffee dates that reminded me I was still 34 and alive. But every time a woman laughed at my dumb jokes, I'd catch myself comparing her to Emily and feeling that familiar ache. The counselor helped me see it wasn't betrayal, it was living. I fixed up the house too. Repainted the living room the soft blue Emily had always wanted. Planted new flowers in the garden where Charles's tomatoes used to grow. The swing set still creaked in the breeze, but now the kids swung higher, laughing louder, and I pushed them with both hands, feeling the wind on my face like maybe, just maybe, she was watching. Looking back, I know some people will call me the jerk. They'll say I kicked out grieving grandparents, tore the family apart, put my own comfort over the kids. Maybe parts of that are true. I carry the weight of those accusations every single day. But I also carry the peace that settled over this house once the arguments stopped echoing off the walls. My kids are sleeping better. They're laughing more. They talk about mommy without the shadow of evil daddy hanging over every memory. And deep down, in the quiet moments when the house is dark and I'm the only one awake, I know I did the right thing. The thing Emily asked me to do all those years ago when she curled into my chest and made me swear. I'm still trying to process all of this. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to hear more of my journey, make sure to subscribe.